So, Soulbinds and Conduits. In the past guide, which I would recommend for you to watch, we covered the main features of Covenants: Renown, cosmetic rewards, the grinds, anima. However, there was one Covenant feature I left out, and that was Soulbinds. So let's talk about that today. I think there's been a lot of confusion ever since this system was announced. Even myself at first, I was a little bit confused. But in reality, it's a pretty simple system, a matchup of relics and artifact traits from Legion with a pinch of Azerite armor traits, providing some passive gains for your character over the course of the expansion. So like many of the systems being covered or already covered here in the channel, Soulbinds and Conduits will be unlocked super early on when you choose your Covenant, after their introductory tutorial-like quests. And it is at the Forge of Bonds that the magic will happen with your Soulbinds. Soulbinds, like I said previously, are very much like the artifact weapon tree or Azerite armor, but without actually taking up a gear slot, as they are in a form of a character, uniquely providing a tree tied to each of the 4 Covenants, all with different setups and traits. You're gonna have a total of 3 characters that you may soulbind to at one time per Covenant, with the very first one immediately given to you in that introductory quest after going through the soulbinding ritual. Once the soulbinding process is finished, you will get access to this new talent-like tree, where you will be able to make your way down, unlocking various passive powers and placing conduits. Now, one very important thing to take note, here on this video and the majority of the footage you might have seen, this doesn't paint the picture of how you actually gonna see the soulbind trees on live, because soulbinds and their traits and conduit slots are locked behind renown levels to unlock them. And here on the beta, we are already at max, so everything is opened up, everything is unlocked. Renown is a topic discussed in the past video, so I won't take up any unnecessary time. I would simply advise you to watch that video at the timestamp if you don't know what Renown is or if you don't understand it that well. But soulbind characters will be something that will be unlocked progressively through your Covenant campaign quests and Renown levels, which is time gated, which on itself, Renown grind to get Renown is gated by how much you can get on a weekly basis. I know, kinda makes your head hurt a bit. Basically meaning unlocking Soulbinds is a weeks to months process. Feel free to check on the screen there how much it will take for all of the 12 Soulbinds in the game from all of the 4 Covenants to be unlocked, which I didn't say in my past guide. The trait rows will also unlock in a similar fashion, but not connected to any particular quest. It's simply connected with Renown levels. From your Renown tab, you'll be able to check all of that, the level brackets and the rows, so feel free to check on the video screen again to know when those unlock and how long does it actually take. So overall, it's going to take some time. Don't expect on live to go to your Covenant, Forge of Bonds, and have all of these choices of all of these traits and conduits to fill up. It's something that will progressively unlock over time with Renown on a weekly basis. So let's talk about the traits and what the hell is conduits and that first choice. So what do these traits do? Well, the soulbind traits are passive gains. That's all they are, connected to a specific soulbind and unique to both that soulbind and Covenant. Meaning as well, they are the same for every class, spec, or role. Again, you can think of them a bit like the general Azerite powers from Azerite armor. Everybody got the same ones there. The pattern that you're going to see on Soulbinds is that on the first initial power that you get, it's somewhat their signature ability of that specific Soulbind. It's the biggest power trait. So let's take one as an example, Naya, right? From the Night Fae Covenant. Nobody really talks about the fairies that much, so let's talk about Naya. So on Naya, you're going to find Grove Invigoration trait as the initial trait that you essentially get for free once you get our Soulbind. And it works much like a trinket. While healing or dealing damage, you have a chance of getting a stack of redirected anima, granting you 1% more health and 25 mastery for 30 seconds. That is stackable, while also having an interaction with the Covenant ability, immediately granting you 16 stacks when you use it. Pretty simple stuff. A trinket could do that for you, right? And on the other covenants, like say Pelagus from the Kyrian, is pretty similar. Also a passive, proccable buff, granting mastery, but instead of having the interaction with the Covenant ability, it drops some orbs at random to pick up to extend the buff duration. On the Venthyr with Naja, I believe that's her name, you get a stackable buff that once at a certain amount of stacks, grants you a 20% haste buff. You get the idea. Powerful but simple passive buffs that some specs may benefit more than others. What about the other Soulbind characters from that same Night Fae Covenant? How they match up against Naya? Well, one thing you're going to find across all the 4 covenants is that there's going to be a Soulbind, a character in a single covenant, more dedicated to raw throughput. Generally, but say on a Night Fae, Naya has clear throughput gains with this single buff. But if we go to our second Soulbind, here the Dreamweaver, you're gonna find a Death Saver on a 10-minute cooldown, so more defensive. Now, of course, you have some throughput gains like haste on the last row, but Naya is more focused on that throughput aspect. On the third and last Soulbind, you're also going to find throughput offerings like a raw increased damage for 10% when enemies are above 75% of HP or below 35% of HP, and a movement speed buff, which can prove good with specs that have good execution tools. And down below, a trait that provides a 25% crit chance buff if you attack first. So it's going to depend on your spec. But generally, a Soulbind has, well, a general rule, but it's not super clear-cut anymore. It used to be far more clear-cut, like one Soulbind was clearly for throughput, another Soulbind was for defensive, and another for utility or just providing some useful buffs. It's not like that anymore, but it's still kinda there. So that's that. We will go back to Soulbinds again when we touch on how you can change them and stuff like that. Now back to our little tree here on Naya. So you have your first trait pick. Your next option to form the path down is also immediately available from the get-go, is an empty conduit slot. So what is conduits then, first of all? Conduits, as you can see from the tree here, complement the traits. They fill in the gaps, and there are many fundamental differences. For one, they are class and spec specific, and like the traits, they come in a form of a relic, so it's droppable from where you can expect to get gear. Dungeons, PvP vendors, world quests, callings, emissary chests, raids, etc. with a separate loot table, which is great, so you can get a conduit along with a pair of shoulders or whatever it might be, and once you have one, you take it back to your Forge of Bonds at your Covenant Sanctum and bind it there, adding it to this little library akin to essences, which then you may add to these empty slots. That easy. There's more to them in terms of drops, but we'll get back to that momentarily. In the end, they will be enhancing some aspects of your abilities, and they have 3 roles: endurance, finesse, and potency. So respectively, conduits that may enhance defensive abilities, like reducing defensive cooldowns, maybe increasing a self-healing ability, giving a healing component to ice block or whatever it might be. Finesse will be on utility-based abilities that your spec might have, the decreasing interrupt cooldown or improving movement speed, or a group-wide buff that your spec may have, like a stampeding roar. And potency then will be both class-wide and spec-specific and dedicated to damage or healing throughput. Maybe improving your Covenant ability damage, the class-wide one, or outright increasing one of your main abilities damage, like Pyroblast or Rampage or Agony, whatever it might be, by a small percentage. Some may even provide minor procs, improving uptimes, improving cooldowns. You get the idea. Now, Soulbinds do have a limit to how much conduit types you can have in a single Soulbind, and they have normalized that across all Soulbinds, so expect to only have 2 potency slots active at any time in a single Soulbind, even after everything is unlocked, with the option of 3 endurance and 2 finesse total conduit placements across the whole tree. Now, when going down this tree then, if you're not googling guides to what is the best path for me for my spec, which we also will cover in our class guides later on, you're gonna have to take in consideration the conduit slot you are unlocking, but also the trait that the slot is unlocking ahead of it. and vice versa. So on Naya, again, we have the option of a potency slot and an endurance slot. Most of us, let's be honest, is going to pick the potency one because we like bigger numbers. But with that, we can unlock a defensive trait ahead of it to our Soul Shape ability, which is the Covenant specific ability to gain some HP while in Soul Shape form. But on the endurance slot path, which is not as exciting overall, we're gonna get a cooldown reduction to our Soul Shape ability, increasing our movement speed, essentially. After that, we don't have a choice at all. No matter what trait or slot you picked before, it will all lead to this finesse slot, but that finesse slot will lead us to 2 traits. One, increasing our movement speed buff by 20% passively after killing an enemy, which is pretty neat, or something completely unrelated, like getting extra materials, like profession materials when killing things that reward XP or honor. That's another thing you're gonna notice about Soulbind traits. Not all of them are about damage or movement speed increases or survivability. Some of them are flavorful or related to professions or to the open world, and they are usually located at the middle of your tree, so that way you can still have things to look forward to unlock later down the line in your tree and in the path. After we get another endurance slot with no choice, and then we have the whole 3 conduit slot choices along with 3 traits that they will subsequently unlock. Most of us will probably go again for the potency, which will unlock the trait Naya's tools Poison, adding a damage component, a dot, to your interrupt, which is fine enough, pretty decent. But if you go for the finesse one, you may unlock a 5% haste buff on the trait. So most of the time, potency slots will reign supreme, because, well, it's a raw damage increase, and for the reasons we're gonna discuss after as well, they are pretty powerful. And across the board, across all Soulbinds, you're gonna find similar patterns to these. Different layouts, but the same ideas. Now, can you change traits then? Can you change the path? Well, yes you can. Changing traits and Soulbinds, for that matter, is super easy. Soulbind characters you can actually change anywhere in the world, so they work a bit like an FPS loadout. From your Covenant tab in your minimap, where you get all of your Covenant goodies, you may simply select your current Soulbind, it will open up the interface, and with at home or at a rested place, much like you change talents, you may simply switch to a different Soulbind. So you can technically create a Soulbind for different roles or content. One for PvP and another for PvE, maybe one for tanking, another one for DPS. It's not always perfect, maybe you want the same trait for both of the roles or the specs that you are playing, but that's one way around it. And yes, you may place as many conduits in as many of the 3 Soulbinds as you wish, you just cannot stack them, so you cannot have 2 of the same conduits in the same Soulbind tree. For traits is also easily changeable, and in turn it will create a different path within your tree, but for that you need to be at the Forge of Bonds. You can simply click them, it changes the traits and activates the slots connected to it, pretty straightforward. Conduits, however, there's a conduit energy resource. Yes, we love those. Very reminiscent from mobile games. So you may change conduits, but that will consume 1 conduit energy out of 10, and 1 energy recharges every 24 hours, so every day. So it's decently fast and it's completely free, but what does this mean? Well, it means that if you want to change conduits, it's super easy. Most people won't have a problem at all, you just need to go to the Forge of Bonds. 10 a day is more than enough, but if you want to constantly change conduits, say for raids and dungeons and PvP all in the same day, because you may have a potency slot that increases your AoE damage and another your single target damage, like say Fire Mage, and you want to be optimal, or maybe you like to change that around. Well, you can do that easily, just have to be careful of how often you are doing it. Is what it is, but it's more than fine. For most people, and how a lot of us play the game, you probably won't even remember that it exists. Now, there is one last thing about conduits that you should know. They work much like gear, like we said before, but they also have a rarity and an item level, following much of your regular gear. If it's from a basic world quest or a normal dungeon, it's likely to be a green and low item level. If it's from a raid, it's going to be an epic and a higher item level based on the difficulty. So what does that do to the power of the conduit itself? Well, it will ever increase its power, quite rapidly. So, as an example, a Flame Strike conduit may increase its damage by 8%, but at mythic level, item level drops, it will increase it by close to 13%, and that will increase over the course of the expansion as item level goes up, upwards to 19%, so it can get quite big in the long run. And the same is applied to conduits that increase an uptime on a cooldown or on a dot or whatever it might be. What happens then if you have a conduit and just got the same variant but with a higher item level, so a more powerful version? Simple, go to the Forge of Bonds, add it, and it will replace it automatically both on your library and on your Soulbind tree. Don't have to spend conduit energy for it. But also meaning expect to be farming the same conduits for the higher item level variants, both in later patches, but even in the current one as you go up in the tiers of difficulty and content, depending how you play the game. A lot like relics in Legion or Azerite armor in Battle for Azeroth, but not as bad. And lastly, to finish everything up, there is one last way to get conduits outside of the generous yet random nature of their drops. In the Maw in-game zone, you will find a vendor called Vanari, which we will discuss a lot in the Maw specific video guide later this month. But here, once at max reputation, you may purchase a lottery conduit ticket, item, to give you a random one that you may not have. It's not a big deal, it's just there to increase the pool of drops in a game that you should be aware of, but nothing to worry about in the first weeks of play because you won't get enough reputation in a mod to buy it. It's gonna take you weeks since it's gated as well, so you cannot grind it off. So yeah, that covers all that you need to know about Soulbinds. A bit weird at first or confusing, but they are really simple power gains, fancy trinkets, basically in a character form in your Covenant, with likely some pretty cookie cutter paths or uses or builds. Alright guys, that covers all the Covenant business so far. Up next in our part 3 of Shadowlands guides, we will be moving on to Torghast. It will be a big video, but after that we will be covering legendary crafting as well, and the Maw, so make sure to subscribe to get that. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next time.